The video game world is no stranger to controversy, from Mortal Kombat's violence in the early days to more recent examples like loot boxes. The Grand Theft Auto series from Rockstar was no stranger to controversy. GTA 3 had graphic violence, simulated sex, race, and ethnic stereotyping, which all stirred the pot at the time. But the GTA series is not what we're here to talk about today. We're here today to talk about Rockstar's most controversial game. The game that headlines ran in the news over. The game that when uncensored the ESRB wouldn't give it a rating other than AO. The game that even to this day is still banned in a few countries around the world. That game is Manhunt.
Rated M for mature.
Manhunt released on November 19th, 2003 here in North America on the PlayStation 2 and on PC and Xbox April 20th, 2004. Manhunt follows our protagonist James Earl Cash, a death row inmate who suddenly awakens from his supposed execution. It turns out he was injected with a moderate sedative as opposed to the lethal concoction of drugs he was scheduled to receive. After waking up, he hears a voice through the intercom telling him he's been given a second chance at life, that the world thinks he's dead, but now he has to do what the director tells him to do to earn his freedom. So James picks up the earpiece as he's instructed to do and follows the director's orders. It just so happens to turn out that his orders involve murdering everybody in his path. Manhunt takes place in Carcer City, a rundown place that has been overrun with violent gangs and corrupt cops and politicians. The director is using Cash to wipe out these violent gangs while recording said murders for his own enjoyment. Manhunt is split up into 20 different chapters, or scenes as the game calls them. Typically, each linear level involves you getting from point A to point B quickly and unheard. At the end of each level, you're usually given a cutscene where Cash is forcibly moved to another location to wipe out another violent gang. Some of these gangs involve white supremacists like the Skins, escaped prison inmates like the Smileys, or paramilitary organizations like the War Dogs. Each gang has their own look, personality, and weaponry. Most of the weapons in Manhunt are there to complement the stealth, though others seem to contradict that a bit, and I want to explain that. So there are different classes of weapons in Manhunt, and they're split up by color. Green weapons are the quietest, but they break after one use. So examples of these are like plastic grocery bags and glass shards. Blue weapons don't break, but the caveat is that they're louder than green weapons. Blue weapons can also be used as tools, like for example using a crowbar to bust a lock off of a door silently, for example. Crowbars, knives, handguns, they're all blue weapons. Moving to the red category, we have the heavy weapons. These don't break either and are the loudest of the three, and they're also the best for when you blow your cover, so when you have to get into a one-on-one melee situation, the red weapons are going to be your best bet. Shotguns, assault rifles, and large blades are just a few examples of these. Now, the yellow category is a bit special in the sense that you can't perform any executions with them. They're your throwables, and they act more like a lure than anything else. Bottles, cans, and bricks are common examples of these. Now, these four categories can be broken down even further if we want to go that route. So, for example, throwable bottles are single use. I mean, they break when they hit the ground, but they have a wider area of effect. Whereas something like a brick will have a smaller area of effect, but you'll be able to pick it back up and use it again and again. I briefly mentioned firearms, and you'd think that firearms might break the stealth mechanic. While yes, it does minimize that aspect, the game is still extremely tense with its firefights. Even on normal difficulty, you're unable to run and gun like you would in a more frantic shooter like Max Payne. Combat essentially plays out like a game of cat and mouse. You get a kill from one location and then hide, waiting until you can pounce on your prey again. Late into the game, Manhunt mostly forgoes stealth altogether, and it turns into more of a standard third-person shooter, but it's still tense due to the time to kill and the graphic level of violence. You're able to blow holes in people's heads you can see right through, and if they have a wall behind them, the chunks will hit the wall and smear down it. It's so brutal. You have to really be careful and use the cover mechanic to your advantage and plan ahead. Planning ahead is key to your survival in Manhunt. I died a lot by simply rushing through an area I should have been more patient with. Alternatively, sometimes you can use the game's mechanics to your advantage in an unconventional way. So for example, here in this clip I'm showing you now, I was killing these snipers, and so I didn't kill everyone in the level below me yet. So what it ended up doing was loudly taking out the snipers so the other enemies would hear the gunshots and rush me. Now, once I got settled settled on this corner, I could just unload on them one at a time and easily take them out. Going in loud is only an option in the later levels, as you don't always have great weaponry from the get-go. Earlier on in the game, you'll be barely scraping by with shivs and grocery bags, where you'll really have to take your time and be stealthy. Manhunt features a stealth mechanic similar to other games in the genre, where you're able to hide in the shadows and wait for an enemy to get close so you can execute them. Executions are the primary reason why Manhunt is so controversial. The level of violence here is unmatched as far as I'm aware. So how this works is once you're behind an enemy and following them, 3 triangles will spin around them. Now, if you tap the action button, it'll perform what the game calls a hasty execution. Now, if you continue to follow them while holding the action button down, it'll turn yellow, and if you hold it even longer, it'll turn red. The level of violence increases with each color change, and I gotta say, some of these are just downright gruesome. Some of the most brutal were the ones where you stab this guy's eyes out. There's another where you bring this guy to his knees and you lop his head off with a baseball bat. And then there's another where you use a wire to just completely saw a guy's head off. Adding to that brutality is the fact that you can now equip that man's severed head and use it as a lure to kill more enemies. At the end of each level, you're scored based on how long it took you to complete the level, how many hunters you killed, how many you executed, and your style points. Style points are gained by performing more gruesome executions, so you have a bit of an incentive to plan out your attacks more effectively. There's a distinction here made between kills and executions because there is a melee combat system that can be utilized if you blow your cover. You're able to swing quickly, but it does less damage, as well as a more powerful swing, but it takes longer to wind up. You can also grab your opponent and punch or stab them quickly in succession. I personally didn't use this system all too much outside of the forced sections because I felt pretty weak. And that's by design too. The game doesn't want you to feel strong or overpowered when compared to other humans. You're not a superhero. At the end of the day, you're just another person. I really liked sneaking around and overcoming the odds in Manhunt. It felt like surviving to the next level was an accomplishment, even on the normal difficulty. At first I struggled because, like I said, this is a genre I don't usually play, but as time went on, I began to love it. There was so much tension, and as a horror movie fan, the music put a huge smile on my face. The music sort of reminds me of something you'd hear in the Warriors game. There's a lot of synth and stringed instruments. In the Warriors, it's upbeat, exciting, it plays more into the action of that game. In Manhunt, it's dark and tense and gives you this sense of pure dread. In addition to that, each scene has its own remix of that level song that plays when you're being hunted down by the gang members. Listen to this short clip real quick. It's awesome, right? It's this perfect combination that I love. The level of immersion and tension when you're being hunted down, hiding in the shadows as these gang members frantically run around and try to find you. The setting in Manhunt might not change too much. You'll fight through a prison, a hospital, across a train yard, through the streets, but there are different parameters for completing different missions. Like I stated earlier, most missions involve you getting from point A to point B. However, some levels might require you to defend an NPC or stay stealthy for the entirety of the mission. And even within those, there are variations to them. What I mean by this is that early on, there's a mission where you're defending a homeless man, and you can give him commands like follow or stop following. So what I did was I would have him hide in the darkness early on in the level, so I was able to run ahead and kill all the gang members in the way. Then once the coast is clear, I went back for him and then I proceeded. So that seems pretty easy, right? Well, later on you're greeted to another escort mission. However, this time you're protecting a journalist. Now, you'd think you'd be able to just continue the way you did before, right? Well, you'd be wrong. The journalist will get scared if you leave her too far behind, so a timer will appear on your screen. Now, if that timer hits 0, she runs right at you with zero regard for her own safety. You'd think this mission would be frustrating, but no, it comes later on in the game, and by this point I felt like I had a pretty good grasp of the mechanics and I beat it fairly easily. And while I'm on the topic of this mission, I want to talk about something else I found interesting. Most of the enemies in Manhunt will carry one weapon and it's clearly visible what it is. The cops on this level, however, will have a melee weapon, but will pull a firearm if they spot a body. So you now have an incentive to hide corpses after you've performed an execution on them. That's pretty cool, right? I mean, up until this point in the game, I would leave the bodies in the open so that I could lure other enemies to them. Now I wanted the opposite to happen. I also want to highlight highlight another mission where you're climbing this spiraling staircase and blasting whatever gunmen are in your way. Once you reach the top of the stairs, their leader pops out at the bottom, and now you have a time limit to descend the stairs to catch him. The problem is, as you're descending the level, more men are rushing up the stairs at you. So now it becomes this game of risk versus reward. Do you charge down the stairs and take a few rounds so you have more time to fight the boss, or do you play it like you would any other gunfight in Manhunt? It's a balancing act that requires trial and error, but it is doable, and it's just one more addition to the variety and uncertainty in Manhunt. There are a few other examples of this in Manhunt, but I want you to experience it for yourself because it truly is a phenomenal game. And while I do believe that, I have some comments and criticisms. So first off, since the central mechanic in Manhunt is the executions, you're sort of forced into killing your opponents. And yeah, I'm complaining about how I have to kill in Manhunt, but hear me out, please. In other stealth games that I've played, which I haven't played many, but in the other ones I have played, you have the option to kill, but sneaking past them is preferred most of the time. This rarely came up in Manhunt, as gates were locked until you killed the designated amount of enemies in an area. So some people are gonna love it, some aren't. I just wish that it was an option, that's all I'm saying. I also felt like the melee combat wasn't very fleshed out. I like how you feel weak, but at the same time, the enemy shouldn't be able to block machetes and baseball bats with their forearms. It's just silly and extends the fight to an unreasonable length of time. My biggest complaint stems from the use of this crane. You only use it twice, but you have to use it to move a fridge that's blocking progress both times. The problem is, this is extremely loud and attracts more than a few hunters. So the game expects you to take the fridge and either drop it on the hunters or swing the fridge into them. And since the hunters are armed this early on in the game, you don't have a firearm. It's a death sentence if you decide to leave the crane early. There are other issues too, like save points maybe being spread out too far, or the fact that you have to physically run back to an NPC during a mission to give them a new command. I'm just being nitpicky at that point though. You sort of have to expect these things when you go into an older game, and it's not something that broke the experience or the immersion for me. If anything, it just added to the tension and forced me to be more patient or use different tactics to get to the next area. My playthrough took me about 9.5 hours to complete, and I died a lot, so your mileage there may vary. I initially intended on playing the Xbox version, but I was browsing Steam and I realized I had bought it at some point, so that's what I played. The PC version is really broken though, so I do recommend downloading it and installing the Manhunt Fixer patch. I'll go ahead and link the guide I followed in the description. Manhunt did well enough to get a sequel in the form of Manhunt 2, which I'll be covering in next week's video, so get subscribed if you're interested in seeing that. In conclusion, Manhunt is a legendary game. It's a game that drew me in with its graphic depiction of violence and its dreary, hopeless world, but kept me on the edge of my seat for other reasons. The tension, the story, the fact that our main protagonist isn't a clean-cut good guy. Some might say that the game is offensive and that alone is reason enough to avoid it, but yeah, it is offensive, but that's the point. I don't think Rockstar could tell a story like this without being offensive. This is the story of a death row inmate being the star of a snuff film where he kills horrible people. I mean, it's controversial, it's brutal, it's graphic, and I love it. Manhunt is a game that you should definitely check out. It's an easy recommendation from me. It's so cheap these days, and it's worth every penny. Seriously, go buy it. It's awesome.
I know! I can hardly believe it myself.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching the video. I want to thank all the subscribers, new and old, for your support. This video was originally supposed to be a double feature with Manhunt 1 and 2, but I realized I had so much to talk about in just this one video, I'd rather split them up. Alright, it's recommendation time, so definitely check out the Red Dead Revolver review if you want to check out another Rockstar game that I reviewed and I loved it. If you're looking for more of like a gory, technically advanced game, look no further than my Cold Winter review. It's a solid shooter, but it has this really impressive dismemberment system that I think gore fiends will enjoy a lot. So as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you again.